Hi, and welcome to Mrs. Pam Reads. Today we are continuing in The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. And we are going to be finishing chapter 7. So this is the third video of chapter 7. In the last video, I'm drawing a blank. Gatsby basically told Daisy's husband that she loved Gatsby, not Tom, her husband, and that she was leaving him and they were going to be together. And Tom was surprised. He kind of had no clue until that day. He kind of got a little inkling. And then Daisy backpedaled a little bit. So that's pretty interesting. We'll see how that goes. All right. It was 7 o'clock when we went into the coop with him and started for Long Island. She looked at Tom. Let's see, you two start home, Daisy said Tom in Mr. Gatsby's car. So it looks like, who to? I glanced at Daisy. Okay, I'm not sure who she got in the car with. Want any of this stuff, Jordan or Nick? So it seems like she got in the car with Gatsby. Okay, so it was 7 o'clock when we got into the coop, we being Nick and Jordan and Tom, with him, Tom, and started for Long Island. Tom talked incessantly, exulting and laughing, but his voice was as remote from Jordan as me, and me as the foreign clamor on the sidewalk or the tumult of the elevated overhead. Human sympathy has its limits, and we were content to let all their tragic arguments fade within the city lights behind. 30. The promise of a decade of loneliness, a thinning list of single men to know, a thinning briefcase of enthusiasm, thinning hair. But there was Jordan beside me, and who, unlike Daisy, was too wise ever to carry well-forgotten dreams from age to age. As we passed over the dark bridge, her wan face fell lazily against my coat's shoulder, and the formidable stroke of 30 died away with the reassuring pressure of her hand. So we drove on toward death through the cooling twilight. 30's not that old. The young Greek, Michaelius, who ran the office joint beside the ash heaps, was the principal witness at the inquest. He had slept through the heat until after 5, when he strolled over to the garage and found George Wilson sick in his office. Really sick, pale as his own pale hair and shaking all over. Michaelis advised him to go to bed, but Wilson refused, saying that he'd missed a lot of business if he did. While his neighbor was trying to persuade him, a violent racket broke out overhead. "I've got my wife locked up in there," explained Wilson calmly. "She's going to stay there till the day after tomorrow, and then we're going to move away." Michaelius was astounded and astonished. They had been neighbors for 4 years, and Wilson had never seemed faintly capable of such a statement. Generally, he was one of those worn-out men. When he wasn't working, he sat on a chair in the doorway and stared at the people and the cars that passed along the road. When anyone spoke to him, he invariably laughed in an agreeable, colorless way. He was his wife's man and not his own. So naturally, Michaelius tried to find out what had happened, but Wilson wouldn't say a word. Instead, he began to throw curious, suspicious glances at his visitor and ask him what he'd been doing at certain times on certain days. Just as the latter was getting uneasy, some workmen came past the door bound for his restaurant, and Michaelius took off and took the opportunity to get away, intending to come back later. But he didn't. He supposed he forgot to, that's all. When he came back outside again, a little after 7, he was reminded of the conversation because he heard Mrs. Wilson's voice, loud and scolding, downstairs in the garage. "Beat me," he heard her cry. "Throw me down and beat me, you dirty little coward." A moment later, she rushed out into the dusk, waving her hands and shouting. Before he could move from his door, the business was over. The death car, as the newspapers called it, didn't stop. It came out of the gathering darkness, wavered tragically for a moment, and then disappeared around the next bend. Michaelius wasn't sure of its color. He told the first policeman that it was light green. The other car, the one going towards New York, came to rest 100 yards behind, and its driver hurried back to where Myrtle Wilson, her life violently extinguished, knelt in the road and mingled her thick, dark blood with the dust. Michaelius and this man reached her first, but when they had torn open her shirtwaist, still damp with perspiration, they saw that her left breast was swinging loose like a flap, and there was no need to listen for the heart beneath. The mouth was wide open and ripped at the corners as though she had choked a little in giving up the tremendous vitality she had stored so long. I'm feeling a little like it's dark here. The sun has come out behind me, which is a lovely thing, but that then makes my face dark, which is not a great thing. Okay, here we go. Better? Maybe not. So, Mrs. Wilson is dead. Okay. We saw the 3 or 4 automobiles and the crowd when we were still some distance away. "Wreck," said Tom. "That's good. Wilson will have a little business at last." He slowed down, but still without any intention of stopping, until, as we came nearer, the hushed, intent faces of the people at the garage door made him automatically put on the brakes. "We'll take a look," he said doubtfully. "Just a look." I became aware now of a hollow wailing sound which issued incessantly from the garage, a sound which, as we got out of the coupe and walked toward the door, resolved itself into the words, "Oh my God," uttered over and over in a gasping moan. "There's some bad trouble here," said Tom excitedly. He reached up on tiptoes and peered over a circle of heads into the garage, which was lit only by a yellow light in a swinging wire basket overhead. Then he made a harsh sound in his throat, and with a violent thrusting movement of his powerful arms, pushed his way through. The circle closed up again with a running murmur, and it was a minute before I could see anything at all. The new arrivals disarranged the line, and Jordan and I were pushed suddenly inside. Myrtle Wilson's body, wrapped in a blanket and then in another blanket, as though she suffered from a chill in the hot night, lay on a work table by the wall, and Tom, with his back to us, was bending over it, motionless. Next to him stood a motorcycle policeman taking down names with much sweat and correction in a little book. At first, I couldn't find the source of the high, groaning words that echoed clamorously through the bare garage. Then I saw Wilson standing on the raised threshold of his office, swaying back and forth and holding the doorposts with both hands. Some man was talking to him in a low voice and attempting from time to time to lay a hand on his shoulder, but Wilson neither heard nor saw. His eyes would drop slowly from the swinging light to the laden table by the wall, and then jerk back to the light again, and he gave out incessantly his high, horrible call. "Oh my God! Oh my God!" Says that 4 times. That's kind of annoying, but painful in stress and grief. Presently, Tom lifted his head with a jerk, and after staring around the garage with glazed eyes, addressed a mumbling, incoherent remark to the policeman. The policeman was saying, "Oh, nor," corrected the man. "Mavor." "Listen to me," muttered Tom fiercely. Said the man. "Oh, he looked up at Tom's. I don't know what they're trying to do. Pronounce their name, maybe? He looked up at Tom's broad hand, fell sharply on his shoulder. "What you want, fella?" "What happened?" "That's what I want to know." "Auto hit her. Instantly killed." "Instantly killed?" repeating Tom, staring. "She ran out in the road. Son of a bee, didn't even stop his car." "There were 2 cars," said Michaelius. "One coming, one going. See?" "Going where?" asked the policeman keenly. "One going each way." "Well, his hand rose toward the blankets, but stopped halfway and fell at his side. "She ran out there, and the one coming from New York knocked right into her, going 30 or 40 miles an hour." "What's the name of this place here?" demanded the officer. "Hasn't got any name." A pale, well-dressed Negro stepped near. Okay, so please, that's the word in the book. That was a word used at the time. I'm not meaning anything derogatory by it. And they didn't use it in a derogatory term. They used it in a descriptive term. I'm sorry. Somebody made a comment about that word in a different book. And so now I'm like, Okay. "It was a yellow car," he said. "Big yellow car. New." "See the accident?" asked the policeman. "No, but the car passed me down the road going faster than 40, going 50, 60. Come here and let's have your name. Look out now. I want to get his name." Some words of this conversation must have reached Wilson, swaying in the door, for suddenly a new theme found voice among his gasping cries. "You don't have to tell me what kind of car it was. I know what kind of car it was." Watching Tom, I saw the wad of muscle back of his shoulder tighten under his coat. He walked quickly over to Wilson and, standing in front of him, seized him firmly by the upper arms. "You've got to pull yourself together," he said with soothing gruffness. Wilson's eyes fell upon Tom. He started up on his tiptoes and then would have collapsed to his knees had Tom not held him upright. "Listen," said Tom, shaking him a little. "I just got here a minute ago from New York. I was bringing you that coupe we've been talking about. The yellow car I was driving this afternoon wasn't mine. Do you hear? I haven't seen it all afternoon." Only the man and I were near enough to hear what he said, but the policeman caught something in the tone and looked over with truculent eyes. "What's all this?" he demanded. "I'm a friend of his." Tom turned his head, but kept his hands firm on Wilson's body. "He says he knows the car that did it. It was a yellow car." Some dim impulse moved the policeman to look suspiciously at Tom. "And what color's your car?" "It's a blue coupe." We've come straight from New York, I said. Someone who had been driving a little behind us confirmed this, and the policeman turned away. Now, if you'll let me have that name again, correct. Picking up Wilson like a doll, Tom carried him into the office, set him down in a chair, and came back. If somebody will come here and sit with him, he snapped authoritatively. He watched while the two men standing closest glanced at each other and went unwillingly into the room. Then Tom shut the door on them and came down the single step, his eyes avoiding the table. As he passed close to me, he whispered, "Let's get out." Self-consciously, with his authoritative arms breaking the way, we pushed through the still gathered crowd, passing a hurried doctor, case in hand, who had been sent for in a wild hope of about a half an hour ago. Tom drove slowly until we were beyond the bend. Then his foot came down hard, and the coupe raced along through the night. In a little while, I heard a low, husky sob and saw the tears were overflowing down his face. "The GD coward," he whimpered. "He didn't even stop his car." The Buchanan's house floated suddenly toward us through the dark, rustling trees. Tom stopped beside the porch and looked up at the second floor, where two windows bloomed with the light among the vines. "Daisy's home," he said. As we got out of the car, he glanced at me and frowned slightly. "I ought to have dropped you in West Egg, Nick. There's nothing we can do tonight." A change had come over him, and he spoke gravely and with decision. As we walked across the moonlit gravel to the porch, he disposed of the situation in a few brisk phrases. "I'll telephone for a taxi to take you home, and while you're waiting, you and Jordan better go in the kitchen and have them get you some supper, if you want any." He opened the door. "Come in." "No, thanks, but I'd be glad if you'd order me the taxi. I'll wait outside." Jordan put her hand on my arm. "Won't you come in, Nick?" "No, thanks. I'm feeling a little sick, and I wanted to be alone." But Jordan lingered for a moment more. "It's only 9:30, she said. "I'd be damned if I'd go in. I'd had enough of all of them for one day, and suddenly that included Jordan too." She must have seen something of this in my expression, for she turned abruptly away and ran up the porch steps into the house. I sat down for a few minutes with my head in my hands until I heard the phone taken up inside and the butler's voice calling a taxi. Then I walked slowly down the drive away from the house, intending to wait by the gate. I hadn't gone 20 yards when I heard my name, and Gatsby stepped from between two bushes into the path. I must have felt pretty weird by that time, because I could think of nothing except the luminosity of his pink suit under the moon. "What are you doing?" I inquired. "Just standing here, old sport." Somehow that seemed a despicable occupation. For all I knew, he was going to rob a house in a moment. I wouldn't have been surprised to see sinister faces, the faces of Wolfsheim's people, behind him in the dark shrubbery. "Did you see any trouble on the road?" he asked after a minute. "Yes." He hesitated. "Was she killed?" "Yes." "I thought so. I told Daisy I thought so. It's better that the shock should all come at once. She stood it pretty well." He spoke as if Daisy's reaction was the only thing that mattered. "I got to West Egg by a side road," he went on, "and left the car in my garage. I don't think anybody saw us, but of course, I can't be sure." I disliked him so much by this time that I didn't find it necessary to tell him he was wrong. "Who was the woman?" he inquired. "Her name was Wilson. Her husband owns the garage. How the devil did it happen? Well, I tried to swing the wheel, he broke off, and suddenly I guessed the truth. Was Daisy driving? Yes, he said after a moment. But of course, I'll say I was. You see, when we left New York, she was very nervous and she thought it would steady her to drive. And this woman rushed out at us just as we were passing a car coming the other way. It all happened in a minute, but it seemed to me that she wanted to speak to us, thought we were somebody she knew. Well, first, Daisy turned away from the woman toward the other car, and then she lost her nerve and turned back. The second my hand reached the wheel, I felt the shock. It must have killed her instantly. It ripped her open. Don't tell me, old sport, he winced. Anyhow, Daisy stepped on it. I tried to make her stop, but she couldn't. So I pulled on the emergency brake, and then she fell over into my lap, and I drove on. She'll be all right tomorrow, he said presently. I'm just going to wait here to see if he tries to bother her about that unpleasantness this afternoon. She's locked herself into her room, and if he tries any brutality, she's going to turn the light out and on again. He won't touch her, I said. He's not thinking about her. I don't trust him, old sport. How long are you going to wait? All night if necessary. Anyhow, till they all go to bed. A new point of view occurred to me. Suppose Tom found out that Daisy had been driving. He might think she saw a connection in it. He might think anything. I looked at the house. There were 2 or 3 bright windows downstairs and the pink glow from Daisy's room on the 2nd floor. You wait here, I said. I'll see if there's any sign of a commotion. I walked back along the border of the lawn, traversed the gravel softly, and tiptoed up the veranda steps. The drawing room curtains were open, and I saw that the room was empty. Crossing the porch where we had dined that June night 3 months before, I came to a small rectangle of light, which I guessed was the pantry window. The blind was drawn, but I found a rift at the sill. Daisy and Tom were sitting opposite each other at the kitchen table, with a plate of cold fried chicken between them and 2 bottles of ale. He was talking intently across the table at her, and in his earnestness, his hand had fallen upon and covered her own. Once in a while, she looked up at him and nodded in agreement. They weren't happy, and neither of them had touched the chicken or the ale. And yet, they weren't unhappy either. There was an unmistakable air of natural intimacy about the picture, and anybody would have said that they were conspiring together. As I tiptoed from the porch, I heard my taxi feeling its way along the dark road toward the house. Gatsby was waiting where I had left him in the drive. Is it all quiet up there? He asked anxiously. Yes, it's all quiet. I hesitated. You better come home and get some sleep. He shook his head. I want to wait here till Daisy goes to bed. Good night, old sport. He put his hands in his coat pockets and turned back eagerly to his scrutiny of the house, as though my presence marred the sacredness of the vigil. So I walked away and left him standing there in the moonlight, watching over nothing. Okay, interesting. Lots of little intricacies going on here in this chapter. All right, you guys. So that's the end of chapter 7. Let's see. Oh, we've got a little ways to go yet. But I did want to mention, this is it for this location. I'm going to miss my blinds and my son and my rocking chair, but we've sold our house. So you'll see me at our second location for a while, and then I don't know what happens after that. I'll keep recording stories for sure, but I don't know where I'm going to be when I'm doing it, but that's okay. We'll figure it out. All right, you guys. I hope you have a wonderful day. I look forward to seeing you soon from our second location. All right. See you next time. Bye.